All right. This recording is being done in 2016, although we have been using the same information since 2014 when the new regulations concerning Condition Code 44 came out. We developed a decision support tree at that time at Appeal Academy, and we have consented to do this recording for the Aerolib Healthcare Solutions LMS. So, included with this course is a copy of the decision support tree itself. It is available in a PDF form. It's 8.5 by 11. You are licensed to copy it and distribute it as is at will. That is the license that comes with it, is as long as you just leave the special copyright notice on it and Appeal Academy's notice on it, then you can copy it and distribute it at will. Okay, let's talk for a moment before we get into the tree itself. I want to go look at the Federal Register and federal regulations about it, and then we will look at the regulations that CMS has written about it with guidance about how to use the Condition Code 44, and that will explain everything in the decision tree and how we created the decision tree. Okay, so first thing we look at is we go into the Code of Federal Regulations, section 482.30, and there is a link at the bottom of this slide that if you download the PDF of the slides and you click on that link, it will take you straight to the document that is publicly available, and that is where this text is from. So as you can see, it says it starts out talking about this under the conditions of participation and how a hospital must have a utilization review plan in place. Now, all of you probably know that, but it refers to how to set up a committee elsewhere. But here it talks about how members of the UR committee itself, they must be, in this case, what they're talking about is if you want to determine admissions or continued stay and make determinations about their patient status, their admission status, then this is what you have to do. You have to have at least one member of the UR committee can look at this, and if that member is responsible for the care of the patient and they concur with the determination, then a determination by the hospital can be made. Or if you notify the practitioner and they fail to present their views when the committee gives them an opportunity to discuss it, then the committee can make a decision. Now, this is going to be tempered a little bit by the regulation from CMS. We'll get to that in a minute. But that's what it says in the Code of Federal Regulations. It says that it can be done, but only under certain circumstances. And then it says that in any other, basically, you've got to have two members of the UR committee agree that the status should be changed. Now, we're talking only about the change from inpatient to outpatient and giving them observation services. There's no such thing as an observation status. There are only two statuses, inpatient and outpatient. But at any rate, if you're looking at it and you do not find that the inpatient admission is medically necessary, if the practitioner, as long as they have had a chance to afford to present their own views about it, to practitioners on the UR committee, in other words, two physicians, can overrule them. However, let's go on to a little bit more. The next paragraph talks about it a little bit more. This is basically the same thing. This top paragraph is the same thing as before, but we get to this second and third paragraph under paragraph D in section 482.30. And it says, before doing that, you have to consult the practitioner responsible for the care of the patient, one who's taking care of them, and allow them to present their view. And if the committee decides that it's not medically necessary, then they must give written notification not later than 2 days after they make this determination to the hospital, the patient, and the practitioner who is responsible for the care of the patient. Now, that may sound like that means the hospital can pretty much overrule the practitioner. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, especially because if you go look at the Medicare Claims Processing Manual, you get a slightly different picture. So here is Medicare Claims Processing Manual, Chapter 1, General Billing Requirements. This is from a transmittal that is for Chapter 1, and it is specifically about policy and billing instructions for Condition Code 44. So there is the link to the PDF that is about that, this particular transmittal. You can see that on the slide. Again, if you download the PowerPoint slides for the course, open it up, and if you click on that link in the PDF, it will open up in a web browser as long as your web browser is allowed to do that. I just mean it may ask you for permission to do that. Anyway, it's on the government site, not on some company's site. So it says here that if in the cases where a hospital or a critical access hospital's UR committee has basically determined that the inpatient is not appropriate under the hospital's inpatient criteria, whatever they're using for that criteria, and of course that's another subject all by itself. That has to be inpatient criteria that's being used throughout the hospital and basically in all cases, so it's evenly applied, not some special case. Then you can change, it says that you can change the beneficiary status from inpatient to outpatient and submit an outpatient claim there, but only for the medically necessary Medicare Part B services that were furnished. But then it puts a caveat on there, providing that all the following conditions are met. And this is what I was referring to before. This is slightly different to what the regulation said. Here in this transmittal, it says that change in patient status from inpatient to outpatient has to be made prior to the discharge or release while the beneficiary is still a patient of the hospital. What does that mean? You can probably argue about that, but it probably means just before they leave, at worst, before they leave the hospital grounds. But frankly, if you want to argue that with somebody, if the discharge has happened, everybody signed off on it, and they just haven't left yet, and you want to try and change it, I think you're kind of on shaky ground. So you may want to think about that clearly. You want this to happen even before the discharge is even written up. You want to make sure that the change happens, and you want to make sure that the hospital has not yet submitted a claim to Medicare for inpatient admission. In other words, the claim hasn't gone out the door yet. That's probably not too big a worry, but you might want to check. The other thing is you want to make sure that the practitioner responsible, in other words, the attending, the one that's on the record as taking care of this patient, that both the attending and the UR committee concur with this decision. In other words, that's a little different than what it said in the regulation. The regulation said if you got two doctors on the UR committee who disagree, you've given the guy a chance, he disagrees with you, you can change it. Well, there's been discussions in the past about, well, wait a minute, that kind of gets into, that may get into malpractice issues, who's really taking care of the patient, are you transferring care with? So there's just a lot of mess there. That's kind of, it's not exactly wiggle room. And so here in the Medicare Claims Processing Manual, they're saying that's a no-no. Don't get into that. Don't do that. If the physician didn't agree with you, don't change it. Medicare won't go along with you. And then the fourth condition is saying that the concurrence of the practitioner responsible for care and the UR committee's decision to change it is all documented in the patient's medical record. Now, I would submit that you want that all to get documented in the medical record before the patient is discharged. The question comes, when do you have to notify the patient? Well, you probably want to notify them before discharge or at discharge, but certainly according to the regulation, you got to do it before 2 days. And according to this, basically, you're already going to have the practitioner, the attending is already notified because they've agreed with you. So they've already kind of concurred. But you want that all in writing. UR committee decision in writing in the record. The practitioner responsible for the care of the patient, you want their concurrence with that documented and in the patient record. So you've effectively then done a code 44 transfer before the patient leaves the building. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at the chart, because that will then, it gives an explanation. Without going through the explanation of why, it just takes you through, well, here are the conditions that have to be made. This is a pretty good shorthand decision for trying to figure out whether or not you can do a condition code 44 or not. So it starts out, let me go ahead and bring up the PDF itself so I can zoom in on that. So now just let me zoom in, and we'll be able to move around the chart one at a time. Okay, so the first thing is you have somebody who has already been admitted as an inpatient, and all the documentation for that is appropriate, but you later determine that through whatever reason, any reason whatsoever, that you've decided, UR committee has looked at it and decided that it is not medically necessary for them to be an inpatient in the hospital. Doesn't matter why. Okay, so has the decision to convert from inpatient to outpatient be made or agreed to by the UR committee? Well, if the answer is no, well, then you want to go back and look at it, make sure that at least you've got one or two of the physicians agreeing that it should be converted to outpatient. If the answer is yes, you've got agreement. Then you want to look and see, has the patient already been formally discharged? We already talked about that. If they have been discharged, especially if they've left the building, you cannot, there's the yes, you cannot use condition code 44 on this claim. You're stuck. You're going to have to bill it that way and rebill it after the fact. You cannot change it with a condition code 44, so don't even submit one, because you'll get into an even bigger mess trying to do that. All right, so if they've not been formally discharged, they're still there, then you want to check and make sure, has the claim for the inpatient admission already been submitted? That's really kind of a formality. I can't imagine that you're going to have that happen very often, where a claim already went out the door and they're not even discharged yet. I suppose that does happen in some cases, in some circumstances, but you decide whether or not that's a question for you to figure out or not, and who would figure that out. But at any rate, that is a question, because that could mess up the whole code 40, it could invalidate your code 44 process. So if that has not happened, okay, then we go on. Now, what has to happen is the UR committee has to review this decision that they want to change it with the attending, with the physician on record, okay? What happens that? There's a result from that. When you talk to the physician, did the physician concur with the decision to convert to outpayment? If they did, well, then you go straight down here. You want to make sure that you acquire all the documentation about the UR committee and the attending's concurrence, and you want to make sure that gets in the record before the discharge. And we'll see what happens after that in just a minute. We'll go back to that box, because I want to talk about what if they did not concur with the decision to convert. Well, then you want the UR committee to see, well, have they got two physicians agreeing that it should be converted? If the answer is yes, at least two physicians have on the UR committee say it should be converted, well, then you want to go back to the attending and try and talk them into it again, and see if you can get concurrence. If you can, then you come out of this box with a yes answer. The attending did concur, and now you have, again, back to this box to make sure you've got the UR committee decision documented in the record, and you have the attending physician's documentation that they concur and that it should be converted, and put that in the record. Now, Oh, the other thing you might want to check on is, are you having them in observation? Well, make sure there's an observation order written if you're going to try and bill for that. And of course, there's hours to consider for that and everything, but that's another subject. But that's something to watch out for. Okay, so what if the second physician, you have one physician goes to them, they say no, the attending says no, I don't want to convert it. Second physician from the UR committee goes with them and says, look, we really do want to convert this. The attending still says no. Then you go out, sit this side, you come back to this box where once again, you're stuck. Whether you're going to rebuild that or send it out, hoping that the attending's opinion will be okay with the payer, which in this case is Medicare, well, you can take that risk or you can go into the rebuild process. But at any rate, you cannot use condition code 44. So once again, you wind up in this box that has no place to go because you're stuck. Okay, if you wind up in the box where you got the attending to concur, now you have both the UR committee decision to convert and the attending decision conferred, and those are put into the record before discharge. Now you have the question, have you notified the patient of the change to outpatient? If no, then you probably want to make sure you notify them, and of course that puts you back in here. Now you've notified them. Well, now yes, then you can use condition code 44 to change status. The only caveat being, according to the regulation, you really have 2 days from the time this decision up here happens. You have 2 days to notify the patient. You have 2 days to notify everybody. But ask yourself if that's what you want to do in the process, or would you rather go ahead and notify the patient while they're still there so they can talk about it. You can possibly educate them as to why that's happening, because of course there are other implications like the charges they may be liable for at that point because it's being billed as Medicare Part B instead of Part A. And there's also the consideration of, well, now what about are they going to be in inpatient for enough to get the 3-day window in order to be able to have Medicare pay for SNF or post-acute care? So that's important, and that's why I think it's important here. And most of the physician advisors I talk to, that is what they want to do. They don't want to wait 2 days, and then, especially if somebody's going to post-acute care, they don't want to wait and have them find that out later. It would be good to talk with the patient at that time. Okay, so that is the tree itself. It's very, very easy to copy and distribute. Like I said, I just want you to make sure you leave the Creative Commons license up there on the document. You can copy it and distribute it as you will. And of course, it is included in the handouts for this course. So with that, that's all we have about it. I hope the tree gives you some good help. If you have any questions about it, of course, contact AeroLib. And if they have concerns about it or questions, or somebody finds a problem with it, they will let me know, and we will adjust it accordingly. But for the last 2 years, this has been working just fine, and we've seen no changes. So thanks for watching. See you in some other course.